Hey there, my name is Michael. I'm the Customer Success Lead at Xano, and in this tutorial, I'm going to cover the Query All Records function. Now, the Query All Records function might very well be the most powerful and flexible function in Xano. There's so much you can do with it. As its name might suggest, Query All Records will query all or get all records from a Xano database table. However, there is a lot you can do with this function to really customize and get that data in any form, almost any form that you want it to, really. So just on my screen here, I have a custom API endpoint open in the no-code API builder. You can see here we're querying all records from this jobs table. We're returning it as this return variable model, and then we're returning that model variable. So when I run this, as you can see, I'm going to get, looks like, all the jobs back in my jobs database table. Looks like there's a title, a table reference to a company it belongs to, and then table reference array or list to the locations that the job contains. So we can actually click on this query all records function, and when we do, we can see there are all these options to customize this function. We have the filter tab where there's joins by custom query. There is also the output tab where there's the response, the return type, something called Evals, and then external for front-end override for filtering, sorting, and paging. So in this tutorial, I'll go through each of these with a quick example to give you a better understanding of how you can actually leverage each of these features in your Xano backend. So just starting with the filter tab, I'm going to skip joins for now. I want to explain some other things first because it'll make more sense once you see some of the other stuff. But let's start with by custom query. And this might be the most widely used part of the query all records function, just depending on your use case though. So by custom query allows you to do filtering or searching basically through your Xano database table. So when I click on this, what we can do is we can add these different where conditional statements and we can chain them together. Okay, so for example, let's have one here. I could go ahead and say where, maybe something like my jobs.title. So when I open this up, what you're seeing is the fields in my actual database table that I'm querying from. So typically we'll want to start with one of these fields on the left side. And we can set this equal to, let's say, set this equal to software engineer, right? So this is just one where conditional statement, but what we can do is we can actually chain these with and, or, and group, or group statements to really make some pretty robust searches. There's also different operators in here. So as you can see right now we have equal, which is just going to be an exact match. Not equal to, greater than, less than, greater than, less than, equal to. There's like and not like, so if I wanted to do more of a case insensitive search, I could use that. Includes, if I was only looking for just part of a string and a string of text. Also in and not in. In is used when you are comparing a single value that you want to find is inside a list or an array. There's also regex. Additionally, when you are comparing arrays to arrays, there's stuff called contains and overlaps. I won't go through all that, but just know that stuff's there. Let's go ahead and use this example real quick. So if I run this right now, what you can see is we'll get one record back, and that's the only one, I guess, that matches software engineer. But we can start to make that dynamic. I could add an input, right? And I could call this job, right? And I could open this back up. And instead of having this hard-coded software engineer in here, I could maybe do my input job. And let's even change the operator. Let's change it to include to make it super flexible. Let's go ahead and save this. And then maybe instead of software engineer, maybe I just want to see engineer. All jobs that includes engineer. And as you can see, we would get two back, right? So you can see how adding inputs starts to make that more dynamic. Of course, we can also get these values from other variables in our function stack, and we could start chaining different statements in here, just depending on our filtering or search parameters, right? A couple other things I want to point out. You also have access to filters in the by custom query, so we can transform the data that we're basically filtering by in here. Some of the filters in the query are a little bit different than what you see in variables in the function stack, but just know that data transformation is available, so you can accomplish probably whatever search you need. Also, there's this ignore empty values check mark. So let's say you have a search input. Sometimes maybe that input will be empty, but you still want to return maybe all the records. You could go ahead and select ignore empty values for that. So that's also another important piece there. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Let's delete this input for now. So that kind of covers by custom query. Let's move on to the output tab now. So the output tab, the first thing you can see is a preview of our response. What we can do right here with customize is we can actually customize the fields we're getting back. So if I click on customize and then select customize the response, I could basically pick and choose what fields I'm getting back. Let's say I just want to get the title back, right? So if I save this and I ran this now, well, this would just return the title of every single job. So that's customized, pretty simple. Of course, if we want all the fields, we could just unselect customize response and update that. So also in this little response preview here, you see add-ons. I won't cover add-ons in depth here because we have dedicated tutorials for that, but add-ons is a way to actually decorate the response or decorate a API response from related data. So as you have seen in the response, this company ID is just a reference to the primary ID of the company table, otherwise known as a foreign key. But what we can do with an add-on, and I'll go through this very quickly, but I could create new add-on. I could add the company table. I might do a single item here, connected on the company ID. Hit create add-on, hit save. But what you can see now is this response will be extended with the related company information. So if I just go ahead and quickly run that, what you can see now is each of these return objects here, each of my records now has this add-on. So we can see that company one, company one is Xano. Looks like company 3 for sales manager is Microsoft. So that's add-on in a nutshell. Like I said, I won't cover it all in depth here, but obviously a very useful and powerful tool in Xano. So I'll go ahead and delete that, and I didn't mean to close that, but let's jump back in here. Next, I want to talk quickly about the return. So by default, query all records returns a list, of course, because it's getting all the records. But we can actually change that to a number of items. We could do existence, which would basically return a true or false value based on something exists. Typically, you'll probably have something in the by custom query to be searching for something specific, but it would just be a true or false value there. Additionally, we can do a count, and this will just give us a quick count of the records. Of course, once again, you might have some kind of custom query filter in here, unless you just do want to count all the records. There's also single, and I want to talk about this for a moment. So single will return basically a single object here. See how there's no array brackets here versus when I change this to a list. So why single is important is because oftentimes we might just be looking for, say, a single record, right? And we have a get record function that does that, but we can only use the get record function to look up by a single field. But if you want to return a single type here, what query all records gives you access to, it gives you access to looking up a field by as many parameters or by custom query where statements as you want. You can also add in joins in there, which I know we haven't covered yet, but it just gives you a lot more flexibility for looking up a single item. So that's a very important thing to remember there. Additionally here, we have aggregates, which are very powerful. So aggregates allow you to group by, aggregate by, and you can always sort by, but additionally sort by. So for example, let's say I wanted to group by, let's get the company ID, right? So we'll be aggregating, or we'll be grouping by the different companies. And then maybe we want to aggregate by, we'll just say the jobs ID, and maybe when I do aggregate by, I choose a field, you choose as, and then there's all these different aggregates. There's average, count, count distinct, max, min, sum, to list, distinct, or to list normal. Let's say I want to get a count. I want to see how many jobs there are at each company. So maybe I'll name this field count. I'll save this. You can see the response will change here. So when I run this now for aggregate, what we'll see is we'll see each company ID and then how many jobs are open at each company. So that's a simple example of aggregate, but it's definitely very powerful and very useful. Once again, you can see all these different aggregators. We could add a sort in there if we wanted to. For this example, it probably wouldn't really make sense. I'm going to go back to list for a minute. As you can see, we can still add sorting in here. You can do sort by any of the fields, ascending, descending, or even random. You could add paging in here, and I'll just quickly show paging. So paging might come in handy if you have maybe thousands of records. You probably don't want to return your entire database. So you can enable paging, and for this example, I might do page 1 per page 2. You can choose to include the metadata in here, and I'll show you what that looks like. If I hit save, now this response becomes a single object, but then nested in there is the array of what we're returning for each page. So if I save this and I run this now, I just want to show you what this looks like. What we have now is our response with paging. And so paging in this sense will be static. Your query all records will always return whatever page and per page is there. However, this kind of leads me into the next thing, which is this external tab, which allows us to do front-end override. So in this case, I'll go through, there's tutorials on each of these, so I'll just go through a quick paging example, and then you can go seek out the other ones if you're interested in doing external filtering or external sorting. So for paging, what we want to do is we want to check basically what we want external for. So there's all these options for permission. Right now we're just going to do paging. You can see it says by external query here, and we need to link up some external configurations. So what we can do is we can create a JSON input here. So I'm just going to add an input, and I might just call this something like external paging. I'll hit save. Let me go back into my query all records, and in here we can go ahead and map this to the input. So what I can do, and this is in our documentation as well, but I can now create a object in here to say something like, let's do, we'll say page 2, and then we'll do a per page of 3. Okay? So we create this object here, we put our page in and per page, and so when I run this now, this will basically manually override our paging. So see, now we have current page is 2 and the items received is 3, whereas before it was page 1 and 2 received. So we can really start to basically, I'll just run that and manipulate that from our front end by passing these in as inputs. And now you can see we're page 1, per page is 3. So that's external paging. Of course, there is also sorting and filtering. You can seek that out on our other tutorials and documentation for that, but just a very quick example there. So let's go ahead. I'm going to remove this now. Let's get rid of paging. One other note about paging, sorting, and if you're doing it externally, you need to make sure that they are enabled here. Okay, so without paging enabled here, I couldn't do the external paging. So I'm going to just remove paging for now. We'll keep this as a list. So if you've noticed, I've already kind of skipped over a couple things. First was joins and also evals. So let's go ahead and talk about both of these real quick. So by joins allow you to accomplish joins in this query all records function. So for example, let's say I wanted to join on that company table. Okay, so I can go ahead and select that. You can select inner, left, or right join. I might want to add a conditional here. You can see this step 2. Conditionals tend to be references or tend to be set equal to table references. So specifically, I might have this jobs.companyID equal to, and notice when I hit this drop down, now I have access to this company database in its field. So I would actually set this, in this example, equal to company.id, you'll notice filters are still available here. Once again, there's different operators. Here's that overlaps one that I was talking about for arrays. And you can chain these where statements as well. So very flexible with these joins, and you can add multiple of the joins as well. See, if I was to open this again, this would be a brand new join. So you can get some really complex queries here. But now that I've joined that table, this actually now gives me access to the fields in the company ID for this query. Now, if I run this, we won't see the joined fields yet. Okay, we can kind of add those in basically, but what this gives us access to is we can still now start to filter based on those company values. So when I open my by custom query here, you can see it says database company, and I can actually access the fields from that company database table now because it's joined. And I could actually maybe filter now my jobs records by those that belong to company name Xano. So now, for example, if I run this, we would just get back to records, which is company ID 1, which is Xano, even though it doesn't show up in our jobs database table in query here. It's because we've accomplished that join. So additionally, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this by custom query. We can use evals to actually reference other fields in the response. It can be from our jobs table. We don't have to do any join to do this. Evals are neat because it basically adds a new field to each of the records, especially if we want to do some kind of transformation to one field and create a new field. But as you can see, when I go to select the fields, we have all my jobs right here, and now we have the company. So just a basic example, if I wanted to put the company name in here, and I might just say company name as the field name. I won't add a filter, but there is filtering for transformation, as I mentioned. You can see company name right here in my evals, and now it's added to the bottom. So if I run this now, we'll see that company name is basically added to the response of each of my records. Of course, we can get more advanced with filtering. Sometimes you might want to have a field that you might want to do some concatenation or some calculation on. That's when evals can come in handy, even with or without a join in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. So there's one final topic I want to talk about before ending the video. I'm first going to delete this join I created here. So that last topic is in Xano, we might have object arrays in our database, and we want to actually use the values within in there to filter our records. So how do we actually do that? So let me go ahead, save this, jump to the database, and we'll come back into my jobs table here, and let's add a object and make this a list or an array basically. I'll just name this field, we'll call it example, and I'll save this, and let's actually add some schema into here. Let's just do an integer. I'll just say it's something like value, and I'll quickly add a few things in here. We'll say 1 and 4. Maybe we'll do 5, 10. Okay. I'll just leave that there. I won't do it all, just for the sake of time. But let's go ahead and jump back to our query all endpoint here. So if we want to actually filter those records by those values within that object array, well, you'll notice if I come into this by custom query and add a conditional, we can see that we have the jobs.example object array, but we don't have the fields actually within that object array. So I can't actually do any filtering here. Like I couldn't say where object.example equals 5. This will actually just throw an error. However, what we can do is we can take advantage of, let me first just delete that right there. We can take advantage of this by joins to actually bind that object array, and it'll give us access to those fields throughout the rest of our query all records function. So for example here, when I go to by joins, in the table, you'll notice here is my array example. So I'll just go ahead and select that. I don't even have to create a conditional. I just simply bind it, hit save, And now when I go into my by custom query and I go to add conditional, now when I hit this drop down, you'll see that there's this new database here called jobs.example. And then you wouldn't want to actually select the name of it because that's the full object array. But what we can do is now select and have access to the fields nested within it. So I can go ahead and select the value field. I could go ahead and set this equal, let's say, to 5. And we should just get the one record back that has value of 5 and 10 in there. I'll go ahead and just do that again. We'll change the operator even. I'll say is maybe less than 3. I think that first record had a value of 1 in there. And you can see once again, this will filter my records. There's record 1. So of course you can make this dynamic on this side with inputs or variables. But obviously just wanted to show that because that's a very important piece of information if you have object arrays just in your database schema. First bind it in the by joins, and then it'll give you access to do things like custom query or even evals to transform or manipulate or filter your data however you may need to be. So thank you so much for watching. I know that was a lot, but this query all records function has a lot to offer. Joins, filtering, aggregates in the response, different return types, sorting, paging, and external override. So I hope you guys found that helpful. If you did, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you in the next one.